Yeah. So one of the biggest things that people oftentimes overlook is just the different types of communication styles as well. How people like to be talked to, how people perceive what they're being told. And so that's one of the things that we dive into.
All right, and welcome to the next episode of the Unbiased Truth podcast. I am Sid, the host, and this episode is sponsored by 360 Home Inspections. And today we have the one and only Bryan with us. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad for the rest of the world that there is only one of me. I don't know that the world can handle more than one. So
tell us what you do. Introduce yourself.
Well, it's probably better to give a little background, but I'll go ahead first. I am a professional speaker and a leadership consultant. After 30 years of being in the investment advisory field, selling my practice a few years ago after a pretty significant health issue, and then working in the nonprofit consulting and networking field for 2 or 3 years. That led me to the leadership development side, which is where the passion was, and the speaking career, which helps me help a lot of folks through some of the things that I went through in life and through business. So I have a company now called Harvesting Chaos, which is based on all of my experiences from 30 years of running business and dealing with chaotic moments in health over the last few years.
So tell us a little bit more about how you got into the leadership consulting world.
Okay. So it does go back to the investment advisory practice, when a lot of times you're working with small business owners or department heads of different companies, either working with their retirement plans or helping them out in estate planning or whatever else. You become a trusted confidant of those folks, and they begin to share things with you. And a lot of times you don't know if they're just sharing them to get them off their chest or if they're actually looking to you for advice because you've been giving them advice on their investment side.
Right.
And over the years, it turned out that they were actually looking for advice on those things. So during that course of time, I had made myself intentional about learning how to give business advice in addition to investment advice and solve leadership problems in businesses. And when I say I made myself intentional about learning it, one of the fears was performing malpractice and giving bad advice on stuff that I was just making up. So I didn't want to do that.
Right.
And then along with that, I've been connected in the community a lot along the years, involved in coaching sports in a number of avenues, probably in addition to all the little league, like most dads come through, and we don't really know. You and I have talked about it. Our kids kind of want us to help out, and then we get on the field and we start coaching, and they don't want us out there anymore. So doing that, but then probably more intensely at the high school level as an assistant, just a volunteer assistant with football through high school, which led me to have some interactions with interesting coaching staffs here and there, and wanting to work on communication issues. I always tell people, if you want to experience chaos in real terms, there are a lot of good high school football coaches around, especially around the Metro Richmond area. There's also a lot of high turnover in high school football coaches because your staffing issues are a lot of times just volunteers, and a lot of times they're just out there to be a part of the group. And so Friday night on the sideline with the headset on, you can experience chaos. So that all that background led me to want to be a problem solver, which is what I've sort of seen myself as most of my life, is helping people get through chaotic moments in life. And it was very natural to, after life led me on a couple of other different paths, to combine all of that experience and turn it into something which was relationship problem solving, basically, for businesses. So kind of a long answer to get to that, but it wasn't a short path. It wasn't like a quick decision to do this. Right. It was something I just felt led to over a number of years.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. My daughter's 8, and we did winter workouts last night, and she asked me if I was going to coach in the spring for softball, and I said no. And that's typically busy season and whatnot. And he's like, "Daddy, I want you to coach." And you said that in the fall, and that lasted the first practice. And you told me you didn't want me to coach no more. It's like, well, I changed my mind this time. Okay. Yeah. But when you start talking about, you hit on two things, communication being one of them, and then problem solving. And I think entrepreneurs by themselves value those two things, and they're really good most of the time at those two things, by themselves anyways, right? Because most entrepreneurs have a problem, they want to solve it, and before they were entrepreneurs, the company that they worked for wouldn't listen to their solutions, and the problem never got solved. They get fed up, and then they go, you know what, I'm going to do it myself, right? And you start your own business. And then the communication side of things, you know, if you go into the fire service, I don't know, police department probably does as well, but I know like military does as well. Anytime there's a bad outcome, they do an after action review. And if there's a death, like a firefighter death, not a civilian death, then there's a chance for NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They'll come in and they, not on every one, they'll pick and choose, but they'll do a complete breakdown of the cause of the death, like what happened, you know, why did that person die? And in almost, if not every NIOSH report that's published, either a primary or a secondary reason for failure has to do with communication somewhere in there. It's in almost everyone, if not everyone. And the same thing in military, same thing in police department. Every failure involves communication. It's not much different in business, you know, in leadership roles, whether it's in those types of roles or whether it's a government job, whether it's home inspections, whether you're a real estate team, a broker, you know, you work at a DuPont plant, whatever it is. If there's a failure, doesn't have to be a death or an injury, just, you know, we had a bad year, you know, or we have high employee turnover, or, you know, somebody didn't show up for where they were supposed to show up, you know, somewhere along the lines, communication is a key to that. And I think one of the things that's really hard for people to understand is, you know, your background going into leadership consulting. A lot of people think that in order, you know, because we do real estate, and this is one of the things that a pain point for us is trying to get into offices to do things outside of home inspections, you know, whether it's DISC assessments or emotional intelligence presentations or leadership development. You know, well, what do you know about being a realtor? Nothing, you know, but you know what I do know about? Leadership. You know, I know about team building. I know about communication. I know what happens and that stuff transcends, doesn't matter what you do. If you have the ability to properly communicate to everybody across industries, it doesn't matter what your background is, you know, because being able to teach some of the stuff and consult with some of the stuff, you can elevate any industry or anybody in any industry. This is why you'll see CEOs bounce around from industry to industry, you know. Yes, it's retail, but going from Home Depot to JCPenney's is still a different type of retail, you know, because it comes down to people, leadership, teams, and communication. So,
yeah. So one of the biggest things that people oftentimes overlook is just the different types of communication styles as well. How people like to be talked to, how people perceive what they're being told. And so that's one of the things that we dive into. A few years ago, I became certified as a coach through Giant Worldwide. And one of their foundational tools is something called the 5 Voices. And so you mentioned DISC assessment. There's also things, you know, Bank and Myers-Briggs and Strength Finders and all these different assessments. And so a lot of Giant consultants use the 5 Voices as just the foundational piece to start the conversation about where the leadership issues are in a business based on just conversation types. So they're, you know, the 5 different voices, and just by title, they are pioneer, connector, creative, guardian, and nurturer. Everyone has all 5 voices in their being, but they're ranked differently.
I've got a lot of voices.
Yeah. So it's not the voices inside your head. It's like
different voices.
Yeah. Different, whole different discussion. We can bring that up because maybe there's one of those voices that might actually hear voices in your head. And but each of those voices define how someone communicates naturally. Like how I as a pioneer, there are things that I say that I assume everyone else understands exactly the way I do. And until I learn the fact that not everyone hears things or interprets things exactly the way I do. So if I don't know that, and if I'm the leader and as a pioneer, I'm short and sarcastic with people at times under moments of pressure, and I don't get why other people don't see the things the way I do, then a couple of bad things are going to happen. There's nothing good that's going to happen out of that situation. If I understand, for example, that guardians by nature don't like change. They like process and procedure, and the way things are is good. This is the way we've always done things, and it works. Right. And then you've got someone who's a creative first voice who's constantly thinking of ways to improve things or in ways to get ahead. And the guardian's like, no, we're not going to do that. Yeah. Well, unless you understand that there are differences of ways of looking at this, you can either become stagnant, employees can get dissatisfied and leave, at least all the other bad things that happen, like mistakes, employee turnover, which is often overlooked as a costly piece of business, is employee turnover. Yeah. It's, you've seen studies about how much it costs to replace certain positions.
That's ridiculous.
And I mean, the higher up the chain you go, the more expensive it comes to. So if there are ways to learn to work through those communication issues, it can actually add to the bottom line. Yeah. I talked to the client this morning. I actually had coffee with, and due to just a lack of communication between a supervisor and an estimator for a job, he had written down, he had started doing some of the metrics on it and realized that they had probably lost about $125,000 on a job between underestimating it and then not controlling cost when they actually got the contract. And it was due to just the communication between two people. And that's an expensive mistake. And it's so, we come in, like my role is to come in and go, this is a really easy question to answer. How much does it cost if you don't solve this problem? Well, here's a real live example. So, and it can make bringing in someone from the outside, it all of a sudden make it real return. Like it's worth it. You can, pay someone a tenth of that and 10 extra return on that investment. That's worthwhile. And that's the kind of thing you look at. So the leadership we consult on today is, it's so different than leadership we were taught 30 years ago, or maybe even leadership in the military where I say you do. Right. And there's no room for discussion. Right. It's very relationship based, and it's just based on where we are as society today too. If we can decide to not learn how to communicate with today's workforce and be stubborn and do things we learned 30 years ago and spin our wheels and fail and run up in cost and, eat into profitability, right? Or we can figure out, how do we communicate with today's workforce? Yeah. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there. Like, there's a book called "Turn the Ship Around," and the whole premise of that. And if you've studied leadership, like there's nothing earth shattering in the book. It's earth shattering to the military, because it's a very top down approach where the commander of the sub came in and did more of a servant style leadership, which was not taught in the Navy or military, and he really turned things around, and from the worst command in the fleet to one of the best, and it's just based off more, I say modern. This stuff's been around for a long time. It's just not been implemented by certain organizations and institutions, because the mentality of, well, how we've always done it works. In the fire department, same thing. 30 years ago, it was that authoritarian style leadership, and what people fail to understand now is, one, the very core of me being a person in 2023 now is that I have options. I don't need to work for you. I can go work wherever I want, versus, we've have centuries of families that didn't make it out of the town. Right. And now if I just feel like it, I can go get a job halfway across the country and start on Monday, so you can talk to me however you want to talk to me, but I may not stay here,
I forget who, I read this somewhere, and I'm bad with names, so I apologize to your listeners. But the concept was where we've come over the past, since the early 1900s, from how we've raised folks or what folks have expected. And so if you go back to the Depression times, the head of the household the key was get a job that puts food on the table and
Yep.
keeps a roof over the head. And that was it.
Yeah.
And so if I got a job, I wasn't leaving. I would work under whatever the conditions were, because the means to the end was putting food on the table.
Yep.
And so that generation became more of, okay, I have my food and I have my needs. I'm going to move on and do the American dream, which is a house,
Yep.
spouse, 2 kids, dog.
Yep.
And that generation's kids had the option of going to college
Yep.
and furthering their career and being able to, pick based on a career. And then when they came through, it was like, I'll do this job, but I can aim higher. So there's something else to go. And now today's generation comes out with options.
Yep.
They're like, what is this job going to do for me?
And
how's this going to fit into my career plans? So,
And in all of that, we also have, for the first time really ever, 5 generations in the workforce.
yeah.
I mean, 5, maybe 6, depending. Generations. And of course, each generation has a subset generation. And that brings another set of problems for leadership, because that authoritarian leadership worked for a very specific generation. And that generation was overly dominant. The baby boomer generation, was a large population that once they hit the workforce, that's what it was, and it wasn't that far removed of the styles of the previous generation. But now we've gone from the baby boomer generation to a very vastly different Gen X, to a very vastly different millennial, to a very vastly different generational Z. And you can walk into whatever job you do, and now you got to figure out how to lead, because one generation may be okay with you saying, get off your ass and go do what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Another generation is going to tell you,
Well, it's also an expectation of a lot of the new generation of folks coming into the workforce come in with a different mindset. They're not, today's new group coming in, they're not about working the same position for 20 years and working their way up the ladder. Most are interested in skipping their way up the ladder or starting at the top of the ladder.
Yeah.
And so much has been also impacted by the past couple of years, and with COVID, everyone working from home.
Yeah.
And now as corporate America is struggling to get folks to come back in the office, and it's still going on. And who was it? Just yesterday, there was another company that announced, was it Disney? Or someone just announced that you're coming back to the
Disney.
office for 4 days a week
that
now.
was Disney.
And so what they're finding is there's a whole new calls for turnover.
Yeah.
Because folks are just like, in today's economy, I can start my own thing.
Yeah.
I'll figure out what niche specialty I can do from home.
Yeah.
And
I mean, how many people still makes me laugh, because, an influencer to me was like, Winston Churchill, but now it's, I can
some
just,
guy with a big TikTok.
yeah,
following,
now it's, and they're making money off of it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't need to go do that job anymore. And there's whole families that's now created in the space of
they're just content creators.
yeah,
All the vlogs.
yeah,
Or like the family vlogs. They're insane.
Yeah, and it goes back to that. Be careful who you listen to and who you follow. Also, so it's like who audits this information to make sure it's correct. Some extent I kind of laugh sometimes. This is really off track, but I almost think it brings back potentially a little bit of Darwinism in some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of these vlogs, if you're not careful what you're following, it could become survival of the fittest again real fast. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and that goes back. This is a rabbit hole for sure. Because
that's what you told me. You're coming on to do a rabbit hole here.
That's
now,
right.
So we're just
that's right.
Go down this thing. And
you start following very specific blogs, and then the algorithms of the internet and social media
controls what you see.
And now you keep getting sucked in. This is how, it was like a Netflix show documentary about all that stuff and how social media, not conspiracy theory, it's true. But this is how we get right, left, extreme left, is because all of a sudden everything you see every time you open your phone, your computer, whatever, it's just more and more extreme. So if you follow whatever, I don't want to say any extreme name because, people, whatever. But now all of a sudden you're QAnon. That's everything you see is going to be that, even though you're just interested in reading about an article about it, you don't know anything about them. Now everything it keeps popping up. The more you click, the more you read, and now all of a sudden you are getting some type of rewiring in your head because that's all you're seeing. You're not seeing the other end now because the system, the machine, doesn't let you see the other sides anymore.
Well, even, and again, not to offend anyone, but even with what's happened recently with Twitter, it's been amazing to watch. Just, some people sort of had this fit about, oh no, there's no truth, there's no what's controlling it. I'm like, were we sure there was truth before? Or,
yeah, exactly.
And it really becomes tough to, like, what is truth anymore? Because we have two sides that'll argue vehemently about what truth is. And it's always like, what is it? If you're settling an argument, there's your side, my side, and somewhere in the middle there's truth.
And and the mainstream stuff from Twitter to Facebook to CNN to Fox News, they're the gatekeepers of the information. So they get to control what you see and read and how you read it and see it. So back to what is the truth, because there's nothing that's being put out there. But before we go any deeper into that,
I was just going to back away from that anyhow at that point.
So when we're talking about leadership and teams and organizations, one of the things that I see a lot, and I want to see how you handle it, what your thoughts are, is that a lot of times a company will bring somebody in, right, and say, hey, we're going to do this leadership training. And like, cool, we need some leadership around here. And then everybody sits down around the table or the classroom or the break room, whatever, and all of a sudden you start looking around like, you know what? I don't see any actual leaders taking this leadership training. It's just grunts on the ground, and it used to infuriate me in the fire department because we'd have mandatory training. Well, mandatory for us, and they would talk about all these, things like, well, how come there's no battalion chiefs or certain people?
Do as I say, not as I do.
And it's frustrating because at the end of the day, that's part. One, it's a morale booster, right? Just to have those people in there, but two, just because you're in a leadership position doesn't mean you can't learn about leadership.
So and that takes us back to wanting actually to define who or what a leader is. Mm-hmm. So what you're describing is, for years, leaders were that person put in charge that everyone under them had to follow.
Yep.
And today that doesn't work as well because folks have options. Mm-hmm. So what we teach is becoming a leader that others want to follow.
Right. And
that's where teaching relational leadership more than task, do as I say type. Yeah. And what you're doing is you're sort of walking. I think I want to describe it this way: you're walking a fine line of empowering everyone, but not to the point of chaos.
Right.
So when we look at the 5 voices, we find that the most successful teams have members from each of with each of the voice. Mm-hmm. So of the 5 voices, like, again, my first voice is pioneer, yours is creator. In a perfect world, if we had 5 people on a team, each one of us would lead with a different voice.
Right.
And that way we're getting a 360 degree, to borrow your company name,
right,
of view of what's going on. Now, it doesn't mean that every team has to be that way, but at least that way we're covering as many of the different possibilities. Mm-hmm. But we're only doing that if everyone feels empowered to speak up and share what's on their mind.
Right.
So what the 5 voices allows us to do is recognize not just the makeups of the voice, but the volumes of the voice also.
Yeah.
So, for example, Pioneer only makes up 7% of the population, but we tend to be the loudest voice. So we're oftentimes leaders, but it's not because we're the best leaders. Right. We can be, but it just means we're the loudest, and we waited around for somebody else to speak up, and no one did.
Yeah.
Nurturers, on the other hand, is the quietest voice, but they make up 43% of the population. Mm-hmm. Well, if they make up 43% of the population, then what they have to say is probably pretty important to the general makeup. So we just teach the interactions between those voices. And when we run a meeting, for example, in a leadership meeting, if an idea or a question is tossed out to the leadership group, which again is something fairly foreign, back 20, 30 years ago, there was just a couple of folks up front, and I'll say a couple of guys up top that just said, okay, this is the way it's going to be. And no one else felt empowered enough to question that, to say, well, have you thought this through? Well, what if X happens? Well, how's this decision going to impact the rest of the staff? And those are things that it doesn't matter because the dollar is what matters. And without any thought to someone else might have a different view downstream and just have their finger better on the pulse of something. So in that group setting now, we even want, I want leaders to make sure that the nurturer has a chance to speak.
Yeah.
And there's a number of reasons why. Number one, it's probably if you listen to them, Mr. Pioneer, Mr. Connector, they're probably going to keep you from making a mistake. If you get them to share, hey, that sounds fun, but did you think of what about this?
Yeah.
And that even applies, not just in a leadership at work role, but also even in your home life. Mm-hmm. We start to realize which voices are nemesis voices with each other. The example I just used, pioneer and nurturer, or they're nemesis voices because the pioneer just wants to move forward. Yeah. There's no obstacle that's going to stop us. My idea is going to get us there, and if it doesn't, I've got another idea. And then the nurturer is in back going, "This is not going to work. This isn't going to work." And oftentimes when it doesn't work, the nurturer is like, I knew it wasn't going to work.
Exactly.
Well, that's of zero value if you didn't speak up early on. I mean, you could
value to me.
Yeah, you could have. Well, it's of zero value if it's not shared, right? So it's on the other loud voices in the room to bring out those quieter voices and give them a chance to talk. And that's when you do that, those quieter voices, even the guardians who make up a big part of the population as well. Now they suddenly just feel empowered just to share what they're thinking. They may or may not want to lead the group, but at least they feel empowered to share.
Right.
And they're both looking at it from a protective standpoint. They're trying to protect you. They're not really trying to hold you back.
Yeah.
They're just trying to keep you from making mistakes that would be costly.
Yeah.
So now, it's not to say that nurturers and guardians can't be good leaders and aren't good leaders.
Right.
There are a lot of good leaders that lead big companies that are nurturers, and they're great at it.
Yeah.
So
well, that's where you can dive into, and I've had this conversation with people during hiring processes, and they say, "Hey, we want to do assessments for the process." And I'm like, "No." And so even the designer of Myers-Briggs said that it was never designed to weed people out. Yeah. Because it's a tool to help you communicate and understand yourself and understand how to communicate to other people to get the best out of everyone. It doesn't mean just because you're in this, I don't want to say box, but in this category or this personality style or whatever you want to call it, that you can't be a good a home inspector, you can't be a good realtor, you can't be a good firefighter, you can't be a good politician, you can't be a good electrician, or that you can't be a good leader, because you look across the spectrum and you look at the military, and the military is going to always be the go-to example because there's so many people come out of the military that do consultations and things like that. There's so many good stories, but there's so many different types of personalities. Like Eisenhower he was a 5-star general, and he never was on the front lines. Never. But it's because of his ability to do what he was great at and manage things and do logistics and plan is what made him so great. Vastly different personality than Patton, right? Both great leaders, both have lots of statues and monuments after them and names, roads. Yeah. But vastly different. If you use a tool, imagine using a tool before they were ever, brought into commissioning or at West Point or whatnot. Like, you know what? You're not a, in this case, a pioneer, or you're not a D personality, so we can't have you here. That's how things would look, because that would have affected, at that point, history to a degree. And it could affect the history of your organization by doing stuff like that, not realizing, like I say, anybody can do it, right? Or everybody has the potential to do it. I won't say everybody can do it, but everybody has the potential to do it. You just got to understand how to bring that potential out of them. And that's what this stuff does. Yeah. It helps identify and pull. So you have the ability to pull it out of them.
Yeah. So one of the things, and actually, we just saw this in Congress with the Republicans taking charge of the House and then having 15 or 16 votes to elect a speaker. But one of the things talked about, not to bring up politics in a bad way, but just as an example of how leadership has been in the past, but is now more questioned, is leadership by inertia. Well, I've been here for 10 years, so I deserve it.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the way a lot of folks see it today. It's are you someone that the rest of the group wants to follow?
Yeah.
You can be here for 20 years, but everybody can't stand you. But you're, it doesn't, nowadays, not everyone is going to accept that just because you've been here longer than everyone else, it's your turn.
Right.
And so there have to be ways to address that and talk about it. And there's a lot of different ways to go. We even talk about what gear people live their life in or work in, which is a whole nother concept. But we can apply that to the voices and really get into how people get stuck in certain situations and can't move on.
Yeah.
And leaders get in that too. Leaders get stuck in certain things and don't know how to lead the group out of it. So we teach concepts for that as well. We use this example of the 5 gears, which literally sometimes you have to explain to younger people what that means, because you literally just use the picture of the end of a gear shift and you're, what is this? It's like showing Courtney's group a rotary phone and asking them what it is.
So what is that?
She didn't know who Ray Charles was earlier, so it was horrible.
No idea.
It was horrible.
Well, this is going to be bad for me, but I usually tell people. So the pioneers, go back to that for a second. Sarcasm is our native voice. It's our native tongue, and we're really good at it. At least we think we are. But not every other voice appreciates it, and so that's one of the things that gets us in trouble, especially if your wife happens to be a nurturer and doesn't like sarcasm. Yeah. So one of my comments oftentimes, if I see something that seems so obvious, I'll just say, even Ray Charles could have seen that.
That's what I said earlier.
Okay, well, so that would have meant nothing to you.
Yeah, I laughed.
It wasn't funny when I had to explain it to her. She's like, "Oh yeah, that's great. Who's that?"
I have no idea.
Does he work for us?
Though. I was like, "Oh, yeah. I have no idea who you're talking about, but that's funny." Huh?
Yeah. So we have to we age ourselves pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But it's even with the 5 gears, some people are just taskmasters, so they're always focused on checking box items off, and that's how they live their life. And if oftentimes if that's where they're stuck, they're not popular people to follow,
right?
If that's where they always live their life. So working with those types of leaders and getting them to understand that there are other parts of life that you need to spend time in, and one might be stepping it up a notch and going to 5th gear and get into focus mode to really solve a problem. But then there are those other things like, come back down to 3rd gear and socialize with people a little bit, and actually getting leaders who are struggling to lead their company to understand that social time, it's the going out for dinner or going out for lunch or playing golf or getting involved in other events. That's so oftentimes where business deals are made. And that's where you can become an influencer. Yeah. So there's some leaders that get so stuck, and we're like, hey, we just use those simple pictures, a gear shift, to just simply explain. And then we have so many leaders that get hung up and they get so drawn into task mastery, just checking off box items, staying focused, and they never give time for their home life or their own personal care, and they get burned out or they don't take time to coach their daughter's softball team.
Yeah, well, and that's where
schedule time for it.
And that's where you go with the difference in the generations and times, right? Because one of the biggest issues that fire departments and just public safety in general and the military is facing now, but fire department specifically is the fact that 1, recruitment's down, but 2, I don't know how many times I had to hear. When it came time for mandatory or for overtime, it was like, well, nobody wants to work anymore. When I was coming up, we would love to be at the fire station because, we didn't want to miss anything. I said, you know what? I mean, it's not that I don't want to work. I want to be with my family now, I've
got options.
Yeah, I mean, working
not
is
that family
great.
should be an option.
Right.
Mandatory also.
But I want to be home with my kids. I want to go to the softball game because when you're working, in that case, 24 hours, you miss a lot. Yeah. Yes, it's 10 days a month, but I promise you, if there's a game or a concert or something that you want to do, it's going to be on a duty day. Guaranteed.
The way it works.
So it's not that people are lazy, and that's a whole other argument, but it's not why. It's not because they're inherently lazy or they don't want to work or they don't have loyalty. It's just that their priorities have shifted over the years. That like, you know what, man, I could work for you for 40 years, and then when I retire, I can have cancer, and I can have, I can't walk, and then I can die 2 years later, or I can just work for you for 40 years and enjoy my life when I'm not here and choose to do that.
Yeah, I've got stories of that from the past, running my investment advisory practice and having people, reach that magical retirement age of 65, back when it was 65, be so excited about everything, and then find out 2 months later they have brain cancer.
So many people in the fire department, it
So,
was the same thing. Within 5 years, it's like, man, they just retired. They hung on, and then they finally hung it up, and same thing. 6 months, a year later, and gone.
And it's just one of those things that just starts to make everyone around them question.
Yeah.
So the questions come up like, what else could I have done something differently?
Yeah.
What was this worth?
And that goes back, it goes back. I think leadership and organizations are at a crossroads, and they've been at a crossroads for the last, 5 years, 10 years, with that old guard of style, of leadership style and mentality of organizations, because they're still that. Because again, there's still baby boomers in the workforce. There's still that generation. There's older Gen Xers that are kind of on that border, that's still in the workforce, that have that mentality, and they're not understanding or comprehending. Like, there's a shift that we have to take, and the easy approach is, well, this generation is just lazy, or this generation just doesn't care, or there's no loyalty here. Versus, what, maybe we need a shift, because like you said, I've told Courtney before, I don't care what you do as long as it gets done. Be where you need to be, get done what needs to get done. If you need to go have meet with realtors, do that, whatever, because. Just because you're going to whatever Third Base Grill place in New Kent for lunch, and maybe you're having a drink, but it doesn't mean you're not doing business and
well, again, that's
deals.
And so that would be like third gear in our sort of how we look at it, because if you do that well, it's a place of influence.
Yeah,
then it's a place to generate business, and it's a different mindset for a broader path. I mean, it used to be that was just the banker's world.
Yeah,
we'll go out and have a 2-martini lunch or whatever, and that's how we make business deals. Or just that group goes to the golf course, and that used to alienate a lot of society that couldn't do it, and it's just become more prevalent. So,
I make fun of Jeff Zielinski all the time, because I say, I think he golfs like 4 days a week, and he calls it networking and business meetings.
Yeah, I call it. What is it, like landscaping, because he's so many times down in the woods looking for his ball. So, and Jeff, if you listen, Jeff is one of the greatest guys in the world. For those who don't know him, he's one of the funniest guys too when he tells you what he does for a living.
Oh yeah.
He apparently has transferred that to his daughter. I heard a story yesterday about him taking her to a networking meeting, and she told him, "You guys, if you don't understand this, you'll have to look it up or get Sidney to tell you more of the story." But Jeff's daughter apparently told everybody who she was interning for, and then said, "I used to work for my dad's puzzle picture taking company." And
that's awesome.
in the networking circles we run in, it's like one of the funniest stories out there. The people fall for that so often, and for her to deadpan it like that, it was a proud dad moment for me.
Yeah, because he goes all in on it.
Oh yeah,
he goes all in. It's a whole bit. 3 to 5 minutes of talking about how he takes all these puzzles, pictures of puzzles and whatnot. Yeah, Jeff was our second podcast. And,
was he a bidet salesman for that one? So that was one of his other things he told people. It's so funny to watch him hook people and go with that too.
Yeah.
Some people just have a natural talent for that.
Yeah, they do.
Something that I would do at the bar is come up with a whole different personality name. Oh, I'm not Courtney, I'm Chelsea, and I work for King's Mini.
It's so funny though. But if it's his style of networking, but if you're around him, he's the most memorable guy at the network.
He is,
and that he does pest control when he leaves, even though he barely says that, because he's hooked you with another story. Yeah, and at the end you go, oh, he does pest. Oh.
Yeah, he's awesome. He prank called me, fully prank called me.
Nice. What was that about?
He called the office and was like, "You guys did a home inspection for me, and my paint is chipping. Is my house gonna fall down?" And he did it in an accent, and I was like, "Your paint is your house is not gonna fall down."
Well, then we're gonna have to come up with a group deal to call him back and tell him that we got overridden by termites after his inspector left.
Oh, it's coming. I'm gonna prank call. It's coming. Yeah, it's coming. Beware.
Make sure you record it, because I think that's going to be one that needs to be shared.
Always just telling that, I'll insert other company name here. Well, this company does that.
Yeah, Use one of the big franchise names.
That's right. That's right.
That's cool. So how much time we got? We talk. I mean, I could talk all day long.
Well, man, I mean, I think we really covered a whole lot of ground there. I think the important points that we just kind of dove into was really that it's important to understand, and I'll go back to the disc analogies that I know because that's what I know. And when I first started going down disc, and I don't know if this is wide or just the program that or the company that I go through, but the way it's set up was you got the golden rule. And that's what we grew up on. And that still applies, in your personal life. I mean, treat others how you want to be treated. I don't want my dog kicked, so I'm not going to kick your dog, But when it comes to business, you want to treat people how they want to be treated, and they call that the platinum rule, which is kind of what you alluded to in the beginning. Yeah. You got to figure out
leader others want to follow. It's kind of the same concept.
Yeah. Talk to them how they want to be talked to, lead them how they want to be led. And is the principles of leadership easy? Yes. Do the right thing, right? Is implementation hard? Yes.
Awesome.
And if you do leadership right at the end of the day of leading and leadershiping, you're exhausted.
But, I think we do that to ourselves as leaders. We make it harder to implement.
Sure.
Because we have our own self-limiting issues. Maybe there's self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times in leaders of yesteryear, it was you held stuff back from not you or me, but there were leaders out there that didn't want to promote the people under them. They didn't want to run the risk of those folks jumping them.
Yeah.
And that actually still happens in some companies today where companies are failing or have departments that are failing, and you have turnover, really heavy turnover, and the turnover is because that leader is not promoting anyone.
Well, and I posted an article the other day from whatever government agency that's in charge of it, about non-competes. Like they're trying to make non-competes go away.
Yeah.
And that's just another way of being fearful, right? Yeah. Like, because there's companies that have non-competes because you're afraid that I'm going to train Courtney, and now Courtney will go take all my secrets and go start her own company, and now I'm in trouble. Well,
instead of just having the concept of being a liberator and having influence, which are way more positive things and will have way more positive impact on you down the road. And
at the end of the day, and I always say, train people so they can leave, treat them so they can stay, but at the end of the day, that just creates more work for you by being fearful, because, I want Courtney to go a whole week without bothering me, but
I wasn't going to laugh, and I looked at her, started smiling, laughing.
Because if I don't tell her everything that I know, let alone what she needs to know, then that's just more work for me.
Well, and here's another interesting thing about that too. So we have, there are companies out left and right that people report service to.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I wanted to research your company before I hired you, there's tons of things out there that I could go look at. Well, it's no different for large employers who are looking to replace people.
Mm-hmm.
There are sites out there where former employees have judged what type of place you are to work for and what type of leadership you possess, or what type of leaders you are.
Yep.
And if it's negative, it makes the hiring process that much more difficult. And the interview process is going to be more them interviewing you than you interviewing them.
Yep. So that was a great point. Like I said earlier, I was doing mock interviews at a high school for seniors this morning, and that was one of the points is that, last question was, do you have any questions for me? So I was like, I don't have anything. I always told you always ask something. And if nothing else, the question you can ask any interview, any company, any position is, what are your expectations of me?
Mm-hmm.
And that right there can really determine, because you're interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing you, and you need to know if you can meet my expectations, if they're reasonable, something that you don't know about, because this is a two-way street these days. I mean, you drive down the street and there's help wanted signs everywhere. You go to LinkedIn, you go to Google, Indeed, Monster, all those places, and the list is long for people needing people. And
which is interesting that there are so many of those out there, those ads out there looking to hire people. Mm-hmm. we're also in this really interesting phase of layoffs being announced every day by the thousands, but we still have all these jobs that are going unfulfilled.
Well, it's important to remember though that those are right now directed at tech, big tech that really excelled during the pandemic, and I think maybe they're coming down a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, we as a society, we always go to excess during good times, and
it's tech and it's real estate tech. The Redfins and the Zillows and things like that. So for now, for now,
and we go through cycles and everything. So So one of the things I want to also mention, if you don't mind, so there's an event that we're going to be hosting on May the 3rd called LeaderCast.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who aren't familiar with LeaderCast, it's a little bit like a TEDx type conference. It's a day-long session. It'll be on May 3rd. We haven't picked the location yet, but it'll be somewhere central to the Richmond metro area. And it's 7 hours of leadership content. So there's a main event hosted in Cincinnati that day, and we will live simulcast it here in Richmond, and it'll be done in several other cities as well. One of the speakers is Jeremy Kubicek, who is one of the founders of Giant, and he'll be talking about the Peace Index, which is one of the tools we use. But there are 7 or 8 really well known, top thought leaders across different industries. It provides some CE credits for certain professions, but we'll have a website up for that in a couple of days, just LeaderCast RVA.
Okay.
And I'll get you more information on it. But it should be a really good event. We'll probably have several hundred that will attend.
Nice.
And it will be, for those who are interested in maybe sponsoring it, we'll have sponsorship opportunities available. Tickets will be really affordable for the content that you're able to get.
Okay.
And then we'll have taped versions of it as well. But
nice.
We'll be able to share more information with you if you want to get that to your listeners. And
absolutely. We'll
down
post
the road.
it. Yep.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Well, man, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know it's
been great.
Was it Tuesday?
Yeah, busy Tuesday.
Busy Tuesdays, right? Not quite Fridays. But I appreciate you coming in, man. I could talk about the leadership stuff all day long.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really is. Just the psychology of it, the dichotomy of it, and all those other
big words.
All those other big words. I don't know what they mean.
Yeah, they sound good.
That's right. It makes me sound smart. But I appreciate you coming in. We'll definitely have to do this again.
Absolutely. Love to.
And if anybody has any questions, want to know more about the 5 voices or your assessments or your skill set or your services, how do they get a hold of you?
So they can reach out to me. The easiest way, and I'll provide it to you, is just my email. It's a long one, but I'll say it. It's Bryan at harvestingchaosllc.com, and everything's spelled just like it sounds. If you don't know how to spell chaos, it is CHAOS.
Courtney she was struggling with that.
I wouldn't know how to spell that.
Yeah, she struggled with shirts earlier. So yeah,
that was 4th grade. I spelled shirt wrong in an assignment. I forgot the R.
Parent teacher conferences after that.
Yeah.
No, the teacher didn't see it. My mom read it though.
We'll note to home.
Well, awesome. We'll make sure we'll have that on the when we drop the podcast in the description and everything. Great. And
and you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, all those places. So
awesome, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.